Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Drew Pavlu Show, episode 2. I am going to be streaming every day for the next 100 days. I am going to conquer my perfectionism by making sure that I stream every single day for the next 100 days. So we've got, I think, about 50 live viewers on Twitter right now. I think we've got about 2 on YouTube. Today, I'm going to be watching the Destiny, Benny Morris, Finkelstein, Lex Fridman show debate. I'm going to be watching that. I've been preparing for a debate that I'm doing tomorrow against History Speaks. That's going to be against History Speaks. He's got about 30,000 YouTube followers. He's going to be debating Israel-Palestine and the war that took place after October 7. I believe we've got almost 100 people watching right now. We've got some comments coming in. LMAO, golden video, bro. Thank you everybody for watching. Now, guys, I've got most people watching right now on Twitter. I encourage everybody to go to my YouTube as well. That's where I'm going to be building up much more of an audience. We want to try and move away from being just on one platform because at any time, Elon could just simply banhammer anybody. Drew, what's your comment on the Russian base access requests in Indonesia? Let me get that up because it is a very interesting development. Before I get into the Destiny stuff, I will get up the Indonesia-Russia base agreement, which is very big very big news in Australian politics. So we've got an almost mini Cuban Missile Crisis taking place in Australian politics right now, an almost mini Cuban Missile Crisis taking place on the cusp of the Australian election, which is going to be taking place in 2 weeks. Now, I'll quickly go through the article with everybody. Let me change my my screen sharing. I will get up that explicit tab. 1 second. Now, let me show you guys. So as we talk, there are reports that Putin and Russia have made a formal request to access a military base in Indonesia. And obviously that is right on the doorstep of Australia. It's a very concerning thing. Good comment by Aldingo Yodru. Have you been celebrating Turkish Labor Day on the 1st of May? Coming up quick. May Day, it's May Day for everybody on the 1st of May, my friend. Not just in Turkey, I believe. But we are going to just quickly go through the crazy news that's coming out of Indonesia. We've got a mini Cuban Missile Crisis taking place on the cusp of the Australian election. And what we're seeing is Russia is trying to get access to an airbase that is right on the cusp of, right on the doorstep of Australia. Now, Indonesia correspondent Bill Birtles has written that story. I'm actually friends with Bill Birtle, good bloke. I've met him a couple of times. Now, let's go through. Australian officials are scrambling to confirm whether Russia is pushing to base long-range aircraft in Indonesia in a move that would sound alarm bells ringing in Canberra. The US military website, Janes, has reported that Moscow has launched an official request to base Russian aircraft at the Manihua Air Force Base at Biak Numphal in the Indonesian province of Papua. Now, let me get up a map here. Let's see how close this is to Australia. I believe this is actually a very close Manihua. Now, where is this base? It is in Papua, I believe. Right. So that may not be correct. Now, let me see. The Manihua Air Force Base. I'm just trying to basically find out where exactly this base will be. But it is in West Papua, I believe, West Papua. Thank you to the 8 people currently watching on YouTube. Please make sure to click the like button. Please make sure to add comments. Just help us reach as many people as we can. Now, I will be streaming every day for the next 100 days, and I'm going to basically be trying my best to break into the streaming market, which is a very, very powerful place. 9 people watching. Please make sure to hit like, guys. Okay, so we're just quickly looking at, before I get into the Destiny Benny Morris debate, we are going to quickly look at this very interesting news in the Indonesian province of Papua. And I'm trying to basically find where this Air Force base is. I'm trying to get up. It seems to be West Papua, which is right on the doorstep of Australia, the north of Australia. When you say we, you mean yourself only, right? Lol. No, we've got a grand team here. Everybody watching. We've got 300 people on Twitter. We've got 7 people on YouTube. That's a grand audience, you see. It's not just me. Now, In 2017, Russia flew 2 nuclear-capable bombers on a patrol mission out of the base on what appeared to be an intelligence-gathering exercise. The prospect of Russian military aircraft based so close to the Australian mainland will stir strategic anxiety in Canberra. Analysts say Russia could also use the Indonesian base to monitor US defense facilities in the Western Pacific, including in Guam. Hello, John. Sup, John. Thank you, everybody watching. We've got, I believe, 7 people on YouTube, 300-ish on Twitter, which is definitely my main platform. I'm encouraging more and more people to go to my YouTube. I will post up the YouTube link as well. 1 second. I'm just going to post. Streaming live Drew Pavlu show. Russian Air Force. Now, let's look at this. The Foreign Minister Penny Wong told reporters that Australian officials were seeking more information from Jakarta. We as a government have reached out to confirm these reports and to understand whether or not those reports are accurate and what the status of those requests from Russia are. The minister also called Russia a disruptive power and that President Putin wants to play that role. I believe that Australia needs to do anything possible to stop that base from being constructed. Anything possible. There should be no Russian aircraft on the doorstep of Australia. It just cannot be allowed to take place. And I would do anything possible to stop that from taking place. What do you guys think? Please, guys, comment your thoughts on this very disturbing development. I would like to hear people's thoughts. Comment on Twitter, comment on YouTube. Tell me your thoughts about this potential Russian airbase on the doorstep of Northern Australia. One source in Jakarta played down the likelihood of Indonesia granting the request, saying it would compromise its long-standing foreign policy principles. Malcolm Davis from ASPI told the ABC Indonesia could well reject the request from Russia. I mean, that would be good. This is not yet a done deal, and it may well fall through. The Australians, the Japanese, and the Americans will be putting pressure on the Indonesians to say no. But he said if Jakarta did give the green light, then more US and Australian military assets would be put in the direct range of Russian military forces. It is a very disturbing revelation to discover today that right on the cusp of the Australian election, 2-3 weeks out, I think we have almost this kind of mini Cuban Missile Crisis on the doorstep of Australia. Do you think that Dutton will get a boost in the election if the agreement goes through? I'm not sure because right now what we're seeing in the Australian election is a big backlash to the Liberals because they are perceived, I think, as being close to Trump. There are some politicians in the Liberal Party who praise Trump, and there seems to be this big backlash right now in Australian politics against that. So we've seen the bottom court fall out of the Australian election campaign. I believe the current polling is almost 57. The current polling is 53 to 47, I believe, in favour of the ALP, which would actually be a pretty decisive defeat of Dutton. And I think that is mostly in response to Trump. So we're seeing this across much of the Western world. We're seeing conservative parties being smashed because they're perceived to be almost, closer to Trump. And we definitely see that in Canada, where the Canadian Conservatives were on track for a landslide victory, and Trump has completely destroyed that. And now the Liberals look like they're going to win that election, and it's quite incredible because just a couple months ago we were seeing polling projections showing the Liberals the Liberals just being absolutely crushed, reduced to 10 seats really, and now they're in the pole position, and really that is a response to Trump. We've got some comments here. Viet Tran, yo bro, the tariff stuff's kind of fueling Vietnamese tankies. Most people here still want US influence to counter China's 9-dash line claim. What's the best outcome here? It's a disaster. It's a real disaster, folks. I'm really upset about the Trump administration's treatment of the Vietnamese. You see the Vietnamese leadership immediately inviting Xi Jinping to visit the country, and really this is a massive rebuff to America. Vietnam was almost a de facto ally of America and the West when it came to the South China Sea, and that has been scorched by Trump's recent policies. It is one of the most disastrous strategic outcomes possible. It's almost like America is sinking one of its carrier fleets. It is such a disaster. This is 20, 30 years of geopolitical work by America in the region, scorched in days. It is such a disaster, guys. And yes, as this guy says, it's really going to fuel the tankies in Vietnam, the people who are pushing against American influence, the people who want a closer relationship with China. they're going to be helped. It's a real disaster here. Sounds like we need to tap the Indonesian cables more effectively than the past. I don't think that is actually a very sensible comment. I don't think that's very sensible because all this stuff is taking place in response to moves by the Trump administration. Without sounding too conspiracy brain, this could honestly just be some Russian disinformation to promote a reaction. Look, if you could say that, but I don't see what the purpose would be from their perspective. I mean, it doesn't help either side of Australian politics. So I'm not necessarily sure how it could be Russian disinformation. Hello from Odessa, Ukraine. Can we use your video materials for our media in real? Absolutely. No, thank you so much. Really cool to see this comment from somebody in Odessa, Ukraine. Please take my footage. I filmed recently in Dobropilia, filmed in the Donbass, filmed in Kherson. Please, I'm really happy for people in Ukraine to use that footage because I documented that to try and show the world what's happening. So yeah, please go ahead. I'd be really happy for you guys to do that. Wow, so true. Thank you so much. Thank you, Stress Potato. Very concerning comment, but very disturbing in many ways. But thank you. Can you tell me your thoughts on Belarus? It is a disgusting dictatorship. I hate Lukashenko. I support full-blown color revolution against Lukashenko. Now, I'm not sure if you guys have any more comments on this emerging story, which is, Russia seeking a base in Indonesia, which directly would threaten Australia. If you guys have any comments, please put them down, and I'm happy to talk about this issue. Before we go on to that, after that, I'm going to look a little bit at the Finkelstein v. Destiny debate on Israel-Palestine. I'm preparing for a big podcast debate tomorrow on Israel-Palestine. I think it'll be about 10 Australian time tomorrow. You should do a deep dive on Russian disinfo, Drew. They regularly fund both sides of each narrative. The confusion is built in. Yeah, absolutely. So we saw that in America. They funded, in 2016, they were funding ads supporting Bernie Sanders. They were also funding Trump ads in 2016. So it's not so much that they care which side wins. They just want to try and, add pressure to the system. They want to try and get people from the far left and the far right to get to power. I don't think Bernie Sanders was at fault there, because he's never really said anything that could be considered to be pro-Russian. So I don't blame Bernie, but that's just the Russian MO. They like to push both sides of the narrative, far left and far right. Let's see. It's not good, but I can't really see the reason for a base in Indonesia for Russia. Are they going to special military operation Broom or Cairns or something? Look, he's kind of got a point here. I mean, it doesn't really make sense from a Russian perspective, because I don't think they actually would really have the military capability to attack us. But I suppose it's just about trying to stretch our forces, just keep people in the South Pacific on notice. I suppose that's probably what we're looking at there. Now, we've got 16 people watching live on YouTube. I want to say thank you to those guys. If you guys are on YouTube, please consider leaving a like. Please consider subscribing. I'm trying to build up the YouTube there. So anybody on my YouTube, I would really appreciate if you guys can like and comment so that we can reach more of an audience. Now, I think I'm going to go through to the Destiny debate very shortly. But let's just quickly see. Opposition leader Peter Dunn said it would be a catastrophic failure of diplomatic relations if the government had not had forewarning about the request before it was made public. It's a very, very troubling development, and suggestion that somehow Russia would have some of their assets based in Indonesia, only a short distance from, obviously, the north of our country. We need to make sure the government explains exactly what has happened here. When asked what his message was to Putin, Dunham replied that he is not welcome in our neighborhood. We have an excellent relationship with the Indonesians. I've met with the president both when he was defense minister and when he was president-elect. Prabowo is a good friend of Australia, but my message to President Putin is that we don't share any values with him. We do not want a military presence from Russia in our region. Well said. I would completely agree there. Prime Minister Albanese didn't say when the government learned about the reported request, but said it was still seeking information. What we're seeking is a proper clarification. That's the way you deal with international relations. A spokesperson from Indonesia's Foreign Ministry told the ABC he hadn't heard about the request, while Indonesian Defense Ministry spokesman Brigadier General Ferdinand Wikas in Kirawang said he wasn't monitoring the issue. Interesting. Okay, that's very interesting. Irabuku, thank you for joining. I remember seeing you yesterday. I really appreciate you joining the stream, my friend. I'm going to quickly bring up. Now I'm going to bring. Sorry, I just had a message. Atrioc. I don't know Atrioc actually. I can have a look at that. What evidence is there for the Trump effect regarding Russian Indonesian base? Oh, look, there's no evidence of that, but I think, you know, we're in a broader environment where America is retreating from the Pacific. A lot of allies, a lot of countries are looking to, you know, diversify their military relations. And unfortunately, yeah, you see Indonesia potentially opening up to Russia, which is very concerning. I'm going to quickly bring up now, guys, the Benny Morris Destiny debate. Let's see. Okay, so. All right, I've got that up. Guys, let me know if you can.
Now, some people accuse me of speaking very slowly, and they're advised on you.
Can you guys hear that? Please, can you guys make sure, just let me know if
to turn up the speed twice to 3 times whenever I'm on. One of the reasons I speak slowly is because I attach value to every word I say.
Normal say this all over and over and over again. I only deal in facts. I don't deal in hypotheticals. I only deal in facts. I only deal in facts. And that seems to be the case, except when the facts are completely and totally contrary to the particular point you're trying to push. The idea that Jews would have out of hand rejected any state that had Arabs on it or always had a plan of expulsion is just betrayed by the acceptance of the 47 partition.
I don't think you understand politics.
They forced the British to prevent immigration of Jews from Europe and reaching safe shores in Palestine.
Well,
That's what they did.
Again,
and they knew that the
was
Jews
Palestine
were being persecuted in Europe.
Was Palestine the only spot of land on earth?
Yes, basically that was the problem. The Jews couldn't emigrate.
What about your great friends in Britain, the architects of the Balfour Declaration?
By the late 1930s,
what about the United States?
Happy to take in Jews, and the Americans
and why are Palestinians, who were not Europeans, who had zero role in the rise of Nazism, who had no relation to any of this, why are they somehow uniquely responsible for what happened in Europe and uniquely culpable?
The only safe haven for Jews.
Professor Morris,
I don't think there's any evidence that Russia was pushing into the Pacific under the Biden administration.
Because of your lot.
And the Biden administration was pretty good in the Pacific. I think they were doing a good job with things like AUKUS. So this is really something that we're starting to see under Trump.
And I'm not disputing it. That's why October 7th happened.
Oh my God.
Oh, cool.
Because there was no options left for those people.
The Hamas guys who attacked the kibbutzim.
Please tell your President Rubin. Please tell him, Prabowo. Please tell him no Russian military base in Indonesia on the doorstep of Northern Australia. Please tell him. I would very much appreciate that, Rubin. It's great to have people from all around the world watching this. What do you think Democrats should do to fight Trump? I think they just need to call out the corruption, the brutality, the third worldification of American politics under Trump. I think they have to be very strong on that. They just have to fight very harsh, very harsh.
Apart from the attacks on the military sites, when they attacked the kibbutzim, were out to kill civilians, and they killed.
I want to say thank you to the 20 people we've got on YouTube right now. Thank you, guys. If you guys are watching, please consider a like and a comment. Just help me reach more people. Really appreciate it. Thank you, guys.
Family after family, house after house.
Talk fast.
I'm just
People think that you're coherent.
I'm just reading from the UN.
Yeah, but you
I know
think
you like them sometimes. Only when they
the
agree with you, though.
Yeah.
You've lied about this
Yeah.
instance in the past. Those kids weren't just on the beaches as often stated in articles. Those kids were literally coming out of a previously identified Hamas compound that they had operated from. They literally think you can...
I think this guy's talking about al-Husseini with Hitler. Unfortunately, the Palestinian national leader al-Husseini did meet with Hitler during World War II.
Borelli, Mr. Borelli, with all due respect, you're such a fantastic moron. It's terrifying.
The following is a debate on.
I think you're right, Ivan. I think Trump's tariffs are strengthening Chinese imperialism because they've now basically damaged every American alliance in the Pacific, and they have destroyed the relationship. They've almost destroyed the relationship with Vietnam. That's equivalent to losing a carrier fleet. That's equivalent to America losing a carrier strike group, to lose a Vietnam when it comes to the South China Sea. So it's a very concerning development. Very concerning development. I actually agree with Stress Potato. Lex is the most artificially pumped podcaster ever. Yeah, look, seriously, guys, where did he come from? Where did Lex Fridman come from? Because I watched this guy. I don't think he's very smart. He reckons he's put in, I reckon Lex Fridman says that he puts in 100 hours in preparation for every single interview. I do not think that's the case. I do not think that is the case at all. I do not know where this guy came from, Lex Fridman. Yeah, where did this guy get AstroTurf from? It's very interesting. He's actually just terrible interviewer, terrible podcaster.
On the topic of Israel and Palestine, with Norman Finkelstein, Benny Morris, Muin Rabbani, and Stephen Bennell, also known online as Destiny. Norm and Benny are historians. Muin is a Middle East analyst, and Stephen is a political commentator and streamer. All four have spoken and debated.
If the left will just purge the far left from the movement, that's how they will win. That's how they will win and contain the Trump movement. I don't think there's any room for the far left on that journey.
Extensively on this topic. The goal for this debate was not for anyone to win or to score points. It wasn't to get views or likes. I never care about those.
It's so funny, Lex Fridman saying he doesn't care at all about likes and views. That's so not true. Someone says he came from a Mossad training camp. I do not think. Yeah, but what about me? What about me? People say I came from a Mossad training camp.
Probably much easier was to get those things if I did care.
Why have they got 20 viewers?
The goal was to explore together the history, present, and future of Israel and Palestine in a free-flowing conversation. No time limits, no rules. There was a lot of tension in the room.
Look, this is the look. I really do dislike Lex Fridman. That said, Zelensky actually is a native Russian speaker, so it's interesting. Zelensky's first language is actually Russian, but you're right. It is interesting that Lex Fridman tried to interview him in Russian. Lex Fridman, he's just an idiot, and the way he treated Zelensky was stupid. Just
from the very beginning, and it only got more intense as we went along. And I quickly realized that this very conversation, in a very real human way, was a microcosm of the tensions and distance and perspectives on the topic of Israel and Palestine.
I just hate listening to him, mate.
For some debates, I will step in and moderate strictly to prevent emotion from boiling. For this, I saw the value in not interfering with the passion of the exchanges, because that emotion in itself spoke volumes.
Emotion. I love you. Humanity. I love all of you. Thank you to my audience. I love you all. That's what I should be saying to the 17 people watching on YouTube. I love you all, guys, so much. Thank you for what you're doing for humanity in watching my show.
We did talk about the history and the future, but the anger, the frustration, the biting wit, and at times respect and camaraderie were all there.
I love
like I said,
guys, humanity,
we did it in an
blah, blah, blah,
perhaps all too human way.
Thank you so much. I
will do more debates and conversations on these difficult topics,
remember,
and I will continue to search for hope in the midst of death and destruction, to search for our common humanity in the midst of division and hate. This thing we have going on, human civilization, the whole of it, is beautiful.
Wow.
And it's worth figuring out how we can help it flourish together.
Wow.
I love you all. This is a Lex Fridman podcast. To support it, please check out our sponsors in the description.
Good question. I will actually make Lex a bit quieter.
Norman
you guys hear me better now.
Benny Morris, Wayne Rabani, and
Steve. Yeah, no, Lex is literally one of the most boring people. I do not know how he's got, holy shit, 4.69 million subscribers. Dude, he's actually fucking boring. I don't know.
For Israelis, 1948 is the establishment of the State of Israel and the War of Independence. For Palestinians, 1948 is the Nakba, which means catastrophe, or the displacement of 700,000 Palestinians from their homes as a consequence of the war. What to you is important to understand about the events of 1948 and the period around there, 47, 49, that helps us understand what's going on today, and maybe helps us understand the roots of all this that started even before 1948. I was hoping that Norm could speak first, and Benny, then Wayne, and then Norm.
After World War II, the British decided that they didn't want to deal with the Palestine question anymore, and the ball was thrown into the court of the United Nations.
We've got like number 7 is mine, aka Irabuku. Thank you, mate. You're a legend. I really appreciate you. You're one of my top streaming viewers. I very much appreciate it. Thank you, guys. We're building a great movement. Imagine after I've done this for 100 days in a row. We're day two now. I swear I'm going to try and stream every single day for the next 100 days. And inshallah, hopefully after 100 days, I'll have a much better audience, because we've got about 20 on YouTube right now. So we've got it says 900 on Twitter. I think that's cumulative. Unfortunately, I don't think we've got 900 watching live on Twitter, but 900 cumulative. Inshallah, very well said, Stress Potato. Does Australia see Indonesia as an ally or a rival? I think it's we've got good relationships with. I think we've got a good relationship with Indonesia. We try and maintain a cordial and good relationship with Indonesia, and hopefully they will value the relationship with Australia, and they will not allow a Russian airbase to threaten Australia like that. I really hope so.
Now, as I read the record,
okay,
the
let's
UN
watch
was not
Norman
attempting to arbitrate or adjudicate rights and wrongs. It was confronting a very practical problem. There were two national communities in Palestine, and there were irreconcilable differences on fundamental questions, most importantly, looking at the historic record on the question of immigration, and associated with the question of immigration, the question of land. The UN Special Committee on Palestine, which came into being before the UN 181 partition resolution, the UN Special...
Yeah, no, that's a good point, Irabuku. I really should have started it earlier today. I did stream a little bit with Pisco. I think it was about like 10 or 11 p.m. American time. But yeah, in future, I'm just probably going to stream mostly Australian morning time, streaming Australian morning time for American viewers, because I think, honestly, a lot of my following now is actually based in America. For Australia, do you think we have a larger pro-Russian or pro-Chinese population down here? No, definitely pro-China, and really, that's just a function of having a very large Chinese diaspora in Australia. We don't really have a large Russian diaspora in Australia. So there are a couple like pro-Putin guys, like Aussie Cossack, Simeon Boykov, just a bunch of fuckwits. If you're looking really, like the pro-China thing is a lot more organized. And I think it's unfortunately a substantial segment of the Chinese Australian community. I think a lot of that is probably not necessarily an ideological pro-communist thing. It's probably more just like, a sense of pride in their, homeland. I understand that. But at the end of the day, we have to expect people living in Australia have to be loyal to Australia. When it comes to things like, Taiwan, we really have to expect people place their first loyalty in Australia. And that's what we have to expect of all new migrants to Australia, I think, guys.
To a committee, it recommended 2 states in Palestine. There was a minority position represented by Iran, India, Yugoslavia. They supported 1 state, but they believed that if forced to, the 2 communities would figure out some sort of modus vivendi and live together. United Nations General Assembly supported partition between what it called a Jewish state and an Arab state. Now, in my reading of the record, and I understand there's new scholarship in the subject, which I've not read, but so far as I've read the record, there's no clarity on what the United Nations General Assembly meant by a Jewish state and an Arab state, except for the fact that the Jewish state would be demographically, the majority would be Jewish, and the Arab state demographically would be Arab. The UNSCOP, the UN Special Committee in Palestine, it was very clear, and it was reiterated many times, that in recommending 2 states, each state, the Arab state and the Jewish state, would have to guarantee full equality of all citizens with regard to political, civil, and religious matters. Now, that does raise the question, if there is absolute full equality of all citizens, both in the Jewish state and the Arab state, with regard to political rights, civil rights, and religious rights, apart from the demographic majority, it's very unclear what it meant to call a state Jewish or call a state Arab. In my view, the partition resolution was the correct decision. I do not believe that the Arab and Jewish communities could, at that point, be made to live together.
Hello, Radin
Disagree
Future.
with the minority
Thank you to anyone
position
who's watching right
from India,
now.
Iran, and Yugoslavia. And that not being a
You know, guys, what I've discovered? I think this is what Hassan Piker does. He just sits down and just watches shit. It does make your job as a streamer a lot easier. Thank you, Hassan, for teaching me this.
Option. 2
Okay,
states
it's
was
interesting
the only
though.
other option.
The reason why I'm watching the Destiny Norman Finkelstein debate is tomorrow, I think it's going to be 10 a.m. Australian time. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly what time that is in American time. 10 a.m. Australian time tomorrow, I'm going to be debating History Speaks, who has about 30,000 subscribers, and we're going to be debating on Israel-Palestine. So I've been doing some homework today.
In this regard, I would want to pay tribute to what
Thank
was
you,
probably
Vietran.
the most moving
Make
speech
sure to like
at the
and
UN
subscribe,
General
my friends.
Assembly proceedings by the Soviet Foreign Minister Gromyko. I was very tempted to quote it at length, but I recognized that would be taking too much time. So I asked a young friend, Jamie Stern-Weiner, to edit it and just get the essence of what Foreign Minister Gromyko had to say. During the last war, Gromyko said, the Jewish people underwent exceptional sorrow and suffering. Without any exaggeration, this sorrow and suffering are indescribable. Hundreds of thousands of Jews are wandering about in various countries of Europe in search of means of existence and in search of shelter. The United Nations cannot and must not regard this situation with indifference. Past experience, particularly during the Second World War, shows that no Western European state was able to provide adequate assistance for the Jewish people in defending its rights and its
By the way, guys, if you've got comments, just add them to the chat. I'm happy to respond to all comments.
Existence from the violence of the Hitlerites and their allies. This is an unpleasant fact, but unfortunately, like all other facts, it must be admitted. Gromyko went on to say, in principle, he supports 1 state, or the Soviet Union supports 1 state. But he said, if relations between the Jewish and Arab populations of Palestine proved to be so bad that it would be impossible to reconcile them and to ensure the peaceful coexistence of the Arabs and the Jews, the Soviet Union would support 2 states. I personally am not.
Well, this is the funny thing, right? What is Norm Finkelstein even really getting at? Why start with the Soviet ambassador and his comment on 1948, the 2-state solution? I just don't really know. Look, guys, please comment on YouTube. I will respond to stuff on Twitter, but please, guys, comment mainly on YouTube. We're really trying to boost the YouTube stream right now. So I think we've got 15 live viewers on YouTube. Anybody who's watching, please like and subscribe. Just comment. Help me reach more people. I'd really appreciate it.
Not convinced that the two states would have been unsustainable in the long term if, and this is a big if, the Zionist movement had been faithful to the position it proclaimed during the UNSCOP public hearings. At the time, Ben-Gurion testified, quote, "I want to express what we mean by a Jewish state. We mean by a Jewish state simply a state where the majority of the people are Jews, not a state where a Jew has in any way any privilege more than anyone else. A Jewish state means a state based on absolute equality of all her citizens and on democracy." Alas, this was not to be. As Professor Morris has written, quote, "Zionist ideology and practice were necessarily and elementally expansionist." And then he wrote in another book, "Transfer," the euphemism for expulsion, "transfer was inevitable and inbuilt into Zionism because it sought to transform a land which was Arab into a Jewish state. And a Jewish state could not have arisen without a major displacement of Arab population. And because this aim automatically produced resistance among the Arabs, which in turn persuaded the Yeshuv's leaders, the Yeshuv being the Jewish community, the Yeshuv's leaders that a hostile Arab majority or large minority could not remain in place if a Jewish state was to arise or safely endure. Or, as Professor Morris retrospectively put it, quote, "A removing of a population was needed. Without a population expulsion, a Jewish state..."
Here's the problem with Norm Finkelstein's argument, right? He makes no acknowledgement whatsoever of the fact that there was a genocidal campaign to slaughter the Jews of British Mandatory Palestine. He makes absolutely no allowance for that fact. So he's just like talking at cross currents here.
"Would not have been established," unquote. The Arab side rejected outright the partition resolution. I won't play games with that. I know a lot of people try to prove it's not true. It clearly, in my view, is true. The Arab side rejected outright the partition resolution, while Israeli leaders, acting under compulsions inevitable and inbuilt into Zionism, found a pretext in the course of the first Arab-Israeli war to expel the indigenous population and expand its borders. I therefore conclude that neither side was committed to the letter of the partition resolution, and both sides aborted it.
Thank you, Norm. Norm asked that we make a lengthy statement in the beginning. Benny, I hope it's okay to call everybody by their first name in the name of camaraderie. Norm has quoted several things you said. Perhaps you can comment broadly on the question of 1948 and maybe respond to the things that Norm said.
Yeah. UNSCOP, the United Nations Special Committee on Palestine, recommended partition. The majority of UNSCOP recommended partition, which was accepted by the UN General Assembly in November 1947. Essentially, looking back.
Thank you to the people watching live now on YouTube. We've got 17 people there. I think we've got 1,200 cumulative on
national groups who refused to.
If you guys are watching,
together,
please remember to like and subscribe. I really appreciate it.
Consolidate
and add your comments,
step
add your
state
thoughts
between them. And Peel said there should be two states. That's the principle. The country must be partitioned into two states. This would give a modicum of justice to both sides, if not all their demands, of course. And the United Nations followed suit. The United Nations, UNSCOP, and then the UN General Assembly, representing the will of the international community, said two states is the just solution in this complex situation. The problem was that
20 live watching on YouTube. Thank you guys. Like,
the Arab states and the Arabs of Palestine said no, as Norman Finkelstein said. They said no. They rejected the partition idea, the principle of partition, not just the idea of what percentage which side should get, but the principle of partition. They said no to. The Jews should not have any part of Palestine for their sovereign territory. Maybe Jews could live as a minority in Palestine. That also was problematic in the eyes of the Palestinian Arab leadership. Husseini had said only Jews who were there before 1917 could actually get citizenship and continue to live there. But the Arabs rejected partition, and the Arabs of Palestine launched, in very disorganized fashion, war against the resolution, against the implementation of the resolution, against the Jewish community in Palestine. And this was their defeat in that civil war between the two communities while the British were withdrawing from Palestine, led to the Arab invasion, the invasion by the Arab states in May 1948 of the country. Again, basically with the idea of eradicating or preventing the emergence of a Jewish state in line with the United Nations decision and the will of the international community. Norman said that the Zionist enterprise, and he quoted me, meant from the beginning to transfer or expel the Arabs of Palestine, or some of the Arabs of Palestine. And I think he's sort of quoting out of context. The context in which the statements were made that the Jewish state could only emerge if there was a transfer of Arab population was preceded, in the way I wrote it and the way it actually happened, by Arab resistance and hostilities towards the Jewish community. Had the Arabs accepted partition, there would have been a large Arab minority.
And look, guys, here's the sad reality: the first massacres that took place in the early 1920s. That was when the first massacre took place. So well before the establishment of the state of Israel. President Prabowo has put the military into the realm of civil service now. We are demonstrating for it to be abolished. Indonesia joined the OECD, might make Prabowo return Indonesia to neutrality, but the OECD has not accepted it yet. Why did Prabowo put the military into the realm of the civil service? Thank you, Ruben. Please let me know. That's interesting.
Minority in the Jewish state.
I want to learn more about Indonesian politics.
And in fact, Jewish.
My understanding of Prabowo is that he had a past background as an authoritarian general and was involved in some human rights abuses.
Economists and state builders took into account that there would be a large Arab minority and its needs would be cared for, etc. But this was not to be, because the Arabs attacked. And had they not attacked, perhaps a Jewish state with a large Arab minority could have emerged, but this didn't happen. They went to war, the Jews resisted, and in the course of that war, Arab populations were driven out. Some were expelled, some left because Arab leaders advised them to leave or ordered them to leave. And at the end of the war, Israel said they can't return because they just tried to destroy the Jewish state. And that's the basic reality of what happened in 48. The Jews created a state. The Palestinian Arabs never bothered to even try to create a state before 48 and in the course of the 1948 war. And for that reason, they have no state to this day.
That is also, unfortunately, a sad reality. The resistance to Israel was not necessarily founded on Palestinian nationalist lines, but it was founded on pan-Arab lines. And that is the case in the 40s.
The Jews do have a state because they prepared to establish a state, fought for it, and established it hopefully lastingly.
When you say hostility, in case people are not familiar, there was a full-on war where Arab states invaded, and Israel won that war.
Let me just add to clarify. The war had two parts to it. The first part was the Arab community in Palestine, its militiamen, attacked the Jews from November 1947. In other words, from the day after the UN partition resolution was passed, Arab gunmen were busy shooting up Jews, and that snowballed into a full-scale civil war between the two communities in Palestine. In May 1948, a second stage began in the war in which the Arab states invaded the new state, attacked the new state, and they too were defeated, and thus the state of Israel emerged. In the course of this two-stage war, a vast Palestinian refugee problem occurred.
And so after that, the transfer, the expulsion, the thing that people call the Nakba happened. Leon, could you speak to 1948 and the historical significance of it?
Sure. There's a lot to unpack here. I'll try to limit myself to just a few points. Regarding Zionism and transfer, I think Chaim Weizmann, the head of the World Zionist Organization, had it exactly right when he said that the objective of Zionism is to make Palestine as Jewish as England is English or France is French. In other words,
but at the exact same time, there were Arab nationalist leaders in Palestine who were saying that they didn't want a single Jew in Palestine. So this is where it becomes very disingenuous to just ignore that history, to ignore the history of Arab rejectionism in the context of the conflict.
As Norman explained, a Jewish state requires
That's a good
Jewish.
point. There have been Arab minority parties in the governing coalition before. There are Arab Israeli members of the Israeli Supreme Court. So really, this idea that it is an apartheid state, it just does not compute with reality.
Political, demographic, and territorial supremacy. Without those three elements, the state would be Jewish in name only. And I think what distinguishes Zionism is its insistence, supremacy, and exclusivity. That would be my first point. The second point is, I think what the Soviet foreign minister at the time, Andrei Gromyko, said is exactly right, with one reservation. Gromyko was describing a European savagery unleashed against Europe's Jews. At the time, it wasn't Palestinians or Arabs, the savages and the barbarians.
Look, I was just going to say to John McElroy, listen, I'm not somebody who, there are obviously lots of different responses, and some people in the Zionist camp will say that, Palestinian nationalism is a completely constructed identity. Look, to be fair, all nationalisms are to some extent constructed. So while there may not have been a nationalist Palestinian identity separate from Arab nationalist identity in the 30s and 40s, it does exist now. And we have to acknowledge the realities on the ground now. But I think the case is that in the 1930s and 1940s, the main resistance to Zionism within British Mandatory Palestine was coming from pan-Arab nationalist leaders.
Were European to the core. It had nothing to do with developments in.
And also, this argument that, the Zionist settlers were all European to the core had nothing to do with the Middle East. This, again, doesn't account for the fact that more than half of the Jewish population of Israel descend from populations that were expelled from North Africa and the Middle East. Jewish population that were expelled by Arabs and expelled by Muslim states. And, they have nowhere else to go. They don't have dual citizenship anywhere. They were ethnically cleansed from the Muslim world, unfortunately.
In Palestine or the Middle East. Secondly, at the time that Gromyko was speaking, those Jewish survivors of the Holocaust and others who were in need of safe haven were still overwhelmingly on the European continent and not in Palestine. And I think, given the scale of the savagery, I don't think that any one state or country should have borne the responsibility for addressing this crisis. I think it should have been an international responsibility. Soviet Union could have contributed. Germany certainly could and should have contributed.
Wow, if only the Soviet Union had taken in more Jews after World War II. Like, this was a structurally anti-Semitic state. Stalin had the doctor's plot. He was persecuting Jews as well. This is just like clown shit by M. Rabbani.
The United Kingdom and the United States, which slammed their doors shut to the persecuted Jews of Europe as the Nazis were rising to power. They certainly should have played a role. But instead, what passed for the international community at the time decided to partition Palestine. And here I think we need to judge the partition resolution against the realities that obtained at the time. Two-thirds of the population of Palestine was Arab. The Yishuv, the Jewish community in Palestine, constituted about 1/3 of the total population and controlled even less of the land within Palestine. As a preeminent Palestinian historian, Walid al-Khalidi has pointed out, the partition resolution, in giving roughly 55% of Palestine to the Jewish community, and I think 41-42% to the Arab community, to the Palestinians, did not preserve the position of each community or even favor one community at the expense of the others. Rather, it thoroughly inverted and revolutionized the relationship between the two communities. And as many have written, the Nakba was the inevitable consequence of partition, given the nature of Zionism.
Interesting comment by Ruben. Prabal said in a recent interview that this was done to formalize positions that the military has often helped fill, such as teachers in rural areas. Wow, so the Indonesian military is taking on a massive civilian role. And military personnel can become attorney general without having to leave their military careers. But our international observers say that he feels threatened by the FDA AUKUS. And why does he feel threatened by AUKUS? It's not directed against Indonesia at all. That's really interesting. Yuki Kanak, since we're talking about the Israel-Palestine conflict, I apologize if you read this out already in episode 1, but what are your thoughts on framing the Nakba as a communist genocide since the time Israel was heavily socialist and aligned with the USSR? Look, I don't think that's actually a fair analysis, because there was a very genocidal, there was an attempt by the invading Arab armies to genocide the Jewish inhabitants of British Mandatory Palestine. And if they had won, they boasted that they were going to drive these people into the sea. So I don't accept the framing of, the Nakba being a Soviet Union-backed genocide. There was an attempted genocide of the Jews living in British Mandatory Palestine by the invading Arab armies. One of the invading Arab armies, the Arab Liberation Army, the irregulars, they literally had as their emblem a dagger going through the Star of David. Their leader was a guy who served in the SS during World War II. You see this over and over and over again. There were a lot of Arab nationalist leaders who went over, fought for Nazi Germany in World War II, or supported Nazi Germany in World War II, and then they were involved in this attempt to kind of strangle the Jewish state in its crib at the start, back in 1947, 1948. So I don't accept that framing, UK Canuck.
Given the territorial disposition, given the weakness of the Palestinian community, whose leadership had been largely decimated during a major revolt at the end of the 1930s, given that the Arab states were still very much under French and British influence, the Nakba was the inevitable product of the partition resolution. And one last point also about the UN's partition resolution is, yes, formally, that is what the international community decided on the 29th of November, 1947. It's not a resolution that could ever have gotten through the UN General Assembly today, for a very simple reason. It was a very different General Assembly. Most African, most Asian states were not yet independent. Were the resolution to be placed before the international community today, and I find it telling that the minority opinion was led by India, Iran, and Yugoslavia. I think they would have represented the clear majority. So partition, given what we know about Zionism, given that it was entirely predictable what would happen, given the realities on the ground in Palestine, was deeply unjust. And the idea that either the Palestinians or the Arab states could have accepted such a resolution is I think, an illusion. That was in 1947. We saw what happened in 48 and 49. Palestinian society was essentially destroyed. Over 80%, I believe, of Palestinians resident in the territory that became the State of Israel were either expelled or fled, and ultimately were ethnically cleansed, because ethnic cleansing consists of two components. It's not just forcing people into refuge or expelling them. It's just as importantly preventing their return. And here, and Benny Morris has written, I think, an article about Yosefites and the transfer committees. There was a very detailed initiative to prevent the return, and it consisted of razing hundreds of Palestinian villages to the ground, which was systematically.
Again, there is no mention whatsoever in this history of the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Jews who were ethnically cleansed from the Middle East and North Africa by Arab Muslim countries, and these populations were ancient in origin, some of them going back 2,000, 3,000 years, and they were fully ethnically cleansed. And that's
implemented,
mentioned
so on and so Palestinians
whatsoever.
Became a stateless people. Now, what is the most important reason that
Ruben says, Pap yourself, he also claimed that Western aid often fund media in Indonesia. So he's got the kind of BRICS obsession with color revolution stuff. That's interesting about Prabowo. I didn't know that.
no Arab state was established in Palestine? Well, since the 19th.
Actually, Ruben, please tell me why is it that West Papua is such like like hardline nationalist issue in Indonesia?
1930s, the Zionist leadership and the Hashemite leadership of Jordan, as has been thoroughly researched and written about by the Israeli-British historian Avi Shlaim, essentially colluded to prevent the establishment of an independent Arab state in Palestine in the late 1940s. There's much more here, but I think those are the key points I would make about 1948.
We may talk about Zionism, Britain, UN assemblies, and all the things you mentioned. There's a lot to dig into. So, again, if we can keep it to just one statement moving forward,
sure.
After Stephen, if you want to go longer. Also, we should acknowledge the fact that the speaking speeds of people here are different. Stephen speaks about 10 times faster than me. Stephen, do you want to comment on 1948?
Yeah, I think it's interesting where people choose to start the history. I notice a lot of people like to start at either 47 or 48 because it's the first time where they can clearly point to a catastrophe that occurs on the Arab side that they want to ascribe 100% of the blame to the newly emergent Israeli state to. But I feel like when you have this type of reading of history, it feels like the goal is to moralize everything first and then to pick and choose facts that kind of support the statements.
This is true by destiny because, as we all know, the first massacres of Jews in British Mandatory Palestine took place in the early 1920s. 20 plus years prior to the establishment of the state of Israel.
Your initial moral statement afterwards. Whenever people are talking about 48 or the establishment of the Arab state, I never hear about the fact that a civil war started in 47. It was largely instigated because of the Arab rejectionism of the 47 partition plan. I never hear about the fact that the majority of the land that was acquired happened by purchases from Jewish organizations of Palestinian Arabs of the Ottoman Empire before the mandatory period in 1920 even started. Funnily enough, King Abdullah of Jordan was quoted as saying the Arabs are as prodigal in selling their land as they are in weeping about it. I never hear about the multiple times that Arabs rejected partition, rejected living with Jews, rejected any sort of state that would have even had any sort of Jewish exclusivity. It's funny because it was brought up before that the partition plan was unfair, and that's why the Arabs rejected it, as though they rejected it because it was unfair, because of the amount of land that Jews were given, and not just due to the fact that Jews were given land at all, as though a 30% partition or a 25% partition would have been accepted, when I don't think that was the reality of the circumstances. I feel like most of the other stuff has been said, but I noticed that whenever people talk about 48 or the years preceding 48, I think the worst thing that happens is there's a cherry picking of the facts where basically all of the blame is ascribed to this this built-in idea of Zionism that because of a handful of quotes or because of an ideology we can say that transfer or population explosion.
What was that, Yuki Canuck? Your fellow Aussie and a convert to Judaism, open Zionist, seems to accept this reality as necessary to establish Israel by genocide. Look, I don't know anything about that. I don't know about who this guy is.
Or basically the mandate of all of these Arabs being kicked off the land was always going to happen, when I think there's a refusal sometimes as well to acknowledge that regardless of the ideas of some of the Zionist leaders, there is a political, social, and military reality on the ground that they're forced to contend with. And unfortunately, the Arabs, because of their inability to engage in diplomacy and only to use tools of war to try to negotiate everything going on in mandatory Palestine, basically always gave the Jews a reason or an excuse to fight and acquire land through that way because of their refusal to negotiate on anything else, whether it was the partition plan in 47, whether it was the Lausanne peace conference afterwards, where Israel even offered to annex Gaza in 51, where they offered to take in 100,000 refugees. Every single deal is just rejected out of hand because the Arabs don't want a Jewish state anywhere in this region of the world.
I would like to engage Professor Morris. If you don't mind, I'm not with the first name. It's just not my way of relating.
You can just call me Morris. You don't need the professor.
Okay. There's a real problem here. And it's been a problem I've had over many years of reading your work. Apart perhaps from a grandchild, I suspect nobody knows your work better than I do. I've read it many times, not once, not twice, at least 3 times, everything you've written. And the problem is, it's a kind of quicksilver. It's very hard to grasp a point and hold you to it. So we're going to try here to see whether we can hold you to a point. And then you argue with me the point. I have no problem with that. Your name, please?
Stephen Bunnell.
Okay.
Mr. Bunnell referred to cherry picking and handful of quotes. Now, it's true that when you wrote your first book, on the Palestinian refugee question. You only had a few lines on this issue of transfer.
4 pages.
Yeah. In the first book.
In the first book, 4 pages.
Maybe 4. You know, I'm not going to quarrel. My memory's not clear. We're talking about 40 years ago. I read it, but then I read other things about you. Okay. And you were taken to task, if my memory is correct, that you hadn't adequately documented the claims of transfer. Allow me to finish. And I thought that was a reasonable challenge because it was an unusual claim for a mainstream Israeli historian to say, as you did in that first book, that from the very beginning, transfer figured prominently in Zionist thinking. That was an unusual, if you read Anita Shapiro, you read Shabtai Tevet, that was an unusual acknowledgement by you. And then I found it very impressive that in that revised version of your first book, you devoted 25 pages to copiously documenting the salience of transfer in Zionist thinking. And in fact, you used a very provocative and resonant phrase. You said that transfer was inevitable and inbuilt into Zionism. We're not talking about circumstantial factors, a war, Arab hostility. You said it's inevitable and inbuilt into Zionism. Now, as I said, so we won't be accused of cherry picking, those were
your thoughts on this, by the way, guys. It's a very interesting question.
Densely argued.
This is apparently what Benny Morris argued in his
and
first
then
book.
in an interview,
in his second book, sorry.
And I could cite several quotes, but I'll choose one. You said, removing a population was needed. Let's look at the words. Without a population expulsion, a Jewish state would not have been established. Now, you're the one, again, I was very surprised when I read your book. Here I'm referring to Righteous Victims. I was very surprised when I came to that page 37, where you wrote that territorial displacement and dispossession was the chief motor of Arab resistance to Zionism. Territorial displacement and dispossession were the chief motor of Arab resistance to Zionism. So you then went on to say, because the Arab population
I'm very interested in Benny Morris'
rationally
response to
feared
not focusing here.
territorial displacement and dispossession, it of course opposed Zionism. That's as normal as Native Americans opposing the Euro-American manifest destiny in the history of our own country, because they understood it would be at their expense. It was inbuilt and inevitable. And so now, for you
Thank
to
you
come
to the
along
16
and say
watchers
that
on
it all
YouTube, by the way.
happened just
Please
because of
remember
the
to like
war,
and comment, guys. Really appreciate
that
your support.
otherwise the Zionists made all these plans for a happy minority to live there, that simply does not gel. It does not cohere. It is not reconcilable with what you yourself have written. It was inevitable and inbuilt. Now, in other situations you've said, that's true, but I think it was a greater good to establish a Jewish state at the expense of the indigenous population. That's another kind of argument. That was Theodore Roosevelt's argument in our own country. He said, we don't want the whole of North America to remain a squalid refuge for these wigwams and teepees. We have to get rid of them and make this a great country. But he didn't deny that it was inbuilt and inevitable.
I think you've made your point there. First, I'll take up something that Muin said. He said that the Nakba was inevitable.
As have you.
And predictable. No, I've never said that. It was inevitable and predictable only because the Arabs assaulted the Jewish community and state in 1947-48. Had there been
There were also massacres in the early 1920s, as I've said many times. There were massacres directed against Jewish civilians, even non-Zionist Jews in British Mandatory Palestine.
no assault,
For example, the Hebron massacre.
probably wouldn't have been a refugee problem. There's no reason for a refugee problem to have occurred, expulsions to have occurred, a dispossession, massive dispossession to occur. These occurred as a result of war. Now, Norman has said that I said that transfer was inbuilt into Zionism in one way or another. And this is certainly true. In order to buy land, they had the Jews bought tracts of land on which some Arabs sometimes lived. Sometimes they bought tracts of land on which there weren't Arab villages, but sometimes they bought land on which there were Arabs. And according to Ottoman law and the British, at least in the initial years of the British mandate, the law said that the people who bought the land could do what they liked with the people who didn't own the land, who were basically squatting on the land, which is the Arab tenant farmers, which is, we're talking about a very small number actually of Arabs who were displaced as a result of land purchases in the Ottoman period or the mandate period. But there was dispossession in one way. They didn't possess the land, they didn't own it, but they were removed from the land. And this did happen in Zionism. And there's, if you like, an inevitability in Zionist ideology of buying tracts of land and starting to work it yourself and settle it with your own people and so on. That made sense. But what we're really talking about is what happened in 47-48. And in 47-48, the Arabs started a war. And actually, people pay for their mistakes. And the Palestinians have never actually agreed to pay for their mistakes. They make mistakes, they attack, they suffer as a result. And we see something similar going on today in the Gaza Strip. They do
unfortunately.
something terrible. They kill 1,200 Jews. They abduct 250 women and children and babies and old people and whatever. And then they start screaming, please save us from what we did, because the Jews are counterattacking. And this is what happened then. This is what's happening now. There's something fairly similar in the situation here. Expulsion, and this is important, Norman, you should pay attention to this. You didn't raise that. Expulsion, transfer were never policy of the Zionist movement before 47. It doesn't exist in Zionist platforms of the various political parties, of the Zionist organization, of the Israeli state, of the Jewish agency. Nobody would have actually made it into policy because there was always a large minority. If there were people who wanted it, all
Got 18 people watching live on YouTube. Please like and comment, guys. Please help us build up the channel. Subscribe if you
can. So it was never adopted, and actually
would really appreciate. Comment your thoughts.
Even in 48, even though Ben-Gurion wanted as few Arabs in the course of the war staying in the Jewish state after they attacked it, he didn't want disloyal citizens staying there because they wouldn't have been loyal citizens. But this made sense in the war itself. But the movement itself and its political parties never accepted it. It's true that in 1937, when the British, as part of the proposal by the Peel Commission to divide the country into two states, one Arab, one Jewish, which the Arabs, of course, rejected, Peel also recommended that the Arabs, most of the Arabs in the Jewish state should be transferred, because otherwise, if they stayed and were disloyal to the emergent Jewish state, this would cause endless disturbances, warfare, killing, and so on. So Ben-Gurion and Weizmann latched onto this proposal by the most famous democracy in the world.
Yuki Canuck. Rudy Rushman has often made this claim that the expulsion of the Arabs and Nakba from British Palestine was a result of the Israeli War of Independence, not an integral part of the Zionist project itself. I'm not familiar with Rudy Rushman, but it's interesting
when they proposed
discussion
the idea
between
of
Norman
transfer
Finkelstein
side by side with the idea of partition, because it made sense. And they said, well, if the British say so, we should also advocate it, but they never actually tried to pass it as Zionist policy, and they fairly quickly stopped even talking about transfer after 1938.
So just to clarify, what you're saying is that 47 was an offensive war, not a defensive war.
By the Arabs, yes.
By the Arabs.
Yeah.
That's
and
true.
You're also
That's
saying
true.
that there was never a top-down policy of expulsion.
Yes.
Just to clarify the point.
If I understood you correctly, you're making the claim that transfer, expulsion, and so on was in fact a very localized phenomenon, resulting from individual land purchases, and that, if I understand you correctly, you're also making the claim that the idea that a Jewish state requires a removal or overwhelming reduction of the non-Jewish population was.
If the Arabs are attacking you, yes.
But that, let's say prior to 1947, it would be your claim that the idea that a significant reduction or wholesale removal of their population was not part of Zionist thinking. Well, I think there's two problems with that. I think what you're saying about localized disputes is correct, but I also think that there is a whole literature that
thank you. I'll look up Rudy Rushman. That's very interesting.
Transfer was envisioned by Zionist leaders on a much broader scale than simply individual land purchases. In other words, it went way beyond, we need to remove these tenants so that we can farm this land. The idea was, we can't have a state where all these Arabs remain, and we have to get rid of them. And the second, I think, impediment to that view is that long before the UN General Assembly convened to address the question of Palestine, Palestinian and Arab and other leaders as well had been warning ad infinitum that the purpose of the Zionist movement is not just to establish a Jewish state, but to establish an exclusivist Jewish state, and that transfer, forced displacement, was fundamental to that project. And just responding to, sorry, was it Bonnell or
Bonnell? Yeah.
With a B?
Yeah.
You made the point that the problem here is that people don't recognize is that the first and last result for the Arabs is always war. I think there's a problem with that. I think you might do well to recall the 1936 general strike conducted by Palestinians at the beginning of the revolt, which at the time was the longest recorded general strike in history. You may want to consult the book published last year by Laurie Allen, A History of False Hope, which discusses in great detail the consistent engagement by Palestinians, their leaders, their elites, their diplomats, and so on, with all these international committees. If we look at today, the Palestinians are once again going to the International Court of Justice. They're consistently trying to persuade the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court to do his job. They have launched widespread boycott campaigns. So, of course, the Palestinians have engaged in military resistance. But I think the suggestion...
Military resistance, it didn't just exist. It didn't just come out of the ether. Obviously, there was literally an assault on October 7, a massacre of more than 1,000 Jewish people, civilians. There were many innocents who were killed. And in the process of that, there was widespread public celebration of the murder of Jewish civilians all across the world in celebration of October 7. And he just sort of just dismisses that, sidesteps it, and just talks about Oh, well, there's just military resistance to Israel.
This has always been their first and last resort, and that they have somehow spurned civic action, spurned diplomacy, I think really has no basis in reality.
I'll respond to that, and then a question for Norm to take into account, I think, when he answers Benny, because I am curious. Obviously, I have fresher eyes on this, and I'm a newcomer to this arena versus the three of you guys for sure. A claim that gets brought up a lot has to do with the inevitability of transfer in Zionism, or the idea that as soon as the Jews envisioned a state in Palestine, they knew that it would involve some mass transfer of population, perhaps a mass expulsion. I'm sure we'll talk about Plan Dalet or Plan D at some point. The issue that I run into is, while you can find quotes from leaders, while you can find maybe desires expressed in diaries.
By the way, thank you to the 20 people live watching on YouTube. I think we've got 2,000 in total on Twitter over the past hour, and we've got 20 live currently watching on YouTube. Thank you guys. Please like and comment, subscribe to my channel to help me boost it. Really
I feel like it's hard to truly ever know if there would have been mass transfer in the face of Arab peace, because I feel like every time there was a huge deal on the table that would have had a sizable Jewish and Arab population living together, the Arabs would reject it out of hand. So, for instance, when we say that transfer was inevitable, when we say that Zionists would have never accepted, a sizable Arab population, how do you explain the acceptance of the 47 partition plan that would have had a huge Arab population living in the Jewish state? Is your contention that after the acceptance of that, after the establishment of that state, that Jews would have slowly started to expel all of these Arab citizens from their country? Or how do you explain that in Lausanne a couple years later that Israel was willing to formally annex the Gaza Strip and make 200,000 or so people those citizens? But I'm just curious, how do we get this idea of Zionism always means mass transfer, when there were times, at least early on in the history of Israel and a little bit before it, where Israel would have accepted a state that would have had a massive Arab population in it? Is your idea that they would have just slowly expel them afterwards? Or
is that question to me or Norm?
Or to either one? I'm just curious for the incorporation of the answer. Yeah.
There's some misunderstandings here, so let's try to clarify that. Number one, it was the old historians who would point to the fact, in Professor Morris's terminology, the old historians, what he called not real historians, he called them chroniclers, not real historians. It was the old Israeli historians who denied the centrality of transfer in Zionist thinking. It was then Professor Morris who, contrary to Israel's historian establishment, who said, now you remind me.
My favorite one is My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. It's a real shame that Kanye's lost his mind. It's a real shame. He was a brilliant artist for a long time.
It's 4 pages, but it came at the end of the book. It was
No, it's at the beginning of the book.
transfer.
Yes,
Yeah,
transfer is dealt with in 4 pages at the beginning
Okay.
of my first book on the Palestinian refugee problem.
it's a fault of my memory, but the point still stands. It was Professor Morris who introduced this idea in what you might call a big way.
Yeah, but I didn't
point
say
being-
it's
okay.
central to the
Okay,
Zionist
allow me-
experiment.
okay,
or experience.
allow me-
You're saying centrality.
Okay.
I never said it was central. I said it was there.
Okay.
The idea.
By the way, it's okay to respond back and forth. This is great. And also, just a quick question, if I may.
Mhm.
You're using quotes from Benny, from Professor Morris. It's also okay to say those quotes do not reflect the
That would
full
be
context
fine.
of the. So, like, if we go back, to quotes we've said in the past, and you've both here have written, the three of you have written on this topic a lot, is we should be careful and just admit, like, well, yeah, well, that's
Just
Fine.
real quick, just to be clear, that the contention is that Norm is quoting a part and saying that this was the
Thank
entire
you,
reason
Brad.
for this, whereas Benny says it's
I'm not quoting a part. I'm quoting 25 pages where Professor Morris was at great pains to document the claim that appeared in those early 4 pages of his book. Now, you say it never became part of the official Zionist platform.
It never became part
Okay,
of policy.
Fine.
Yeah, I know what you're
Fine,
saying,
yeah,
but it wasn't policy.
We're also asked, well, this is true. Why did that happen? Why did that happen? It's because it's a very simple fact, which everybody understands. Ideology doesn't operate in a vacuum. There are real world practical problems. You can't just take an ideology and superimpose it on a political reality and turn it into a fact. It was the British mandate. There was significant Arab resistance to Zionism. And that resistance was based on the fact, as you said, the fear of territorial displacement and dispossession. So you couldn't very well expect the Zionist movement to come out in neon lights and announce, hey, we're going to be expelling you the first chance we get.
Okay,
That's not realistic.
Okay,
Now,
let me
okay.
respond. Look, you've said it a number of times
Mhm.
that the Arabs, from fairly early on in the conflict, from the 1890s or the early 1900s, said the Jews intend to expel us. This doesn't mean that it's true. It means that some Arabs said this, maybe believing it was true, maybe using it as a political instrument to gain support to mobilize Arabs against the Zionist experiment. But the fact is, transfer did not occur before 1947. And Arabs later said, and then and since then, have said that the Jews want to build a third temple on the Temple Mount, as if that's what really the mainstream of Zionism has always wanted and always strived for. But this is nonsense. It's something that Husseini used to use as a way to mobilize masses for the cause, using religion as the way to get them to join him. The fact that Arabs said that the Zionists wanted to dispossess us doesn't mean it's true. It just means that some Arabs thought that, maybe said it sincerely and maybe insincerely.
Professor Morris.
Later, it became a self-fulfilling prophecy. This is true.
Professor
Because
Morris.
Arabs attacked the Jews.
Professor Morris, I read through your stuff. Even yesterday, I was looking through Righteous
You
Victims.
should read other things. You're wasting your time.
No, actually, no.
Same word.
I do read other things, but I don't consider it a waste of time to read you. Not at all. You say that this wasn't inherent in Zionism. Now, would you agree that David Ben-Gurion was a Zionist?
A major Zionist leader.
Right. Would you agree Chaim Weizmann was a Zionist?
Yeah.
Okay. I believe they were. I believe they took their ideology seriously. It was the first generation. Just like with the Bolsheviks, the first generation was committed to an idea. By the 1930s, it was just pure realpolitik. The ideology went out the window. The first generation, I have no doubt about their convictions. Okay? They were Zionists. Transfer was inevitable and inbuilt in Zionism.
You keep repeating the same thing.
Because I have, as I said, then, Mr. Morris, I have a problem reconciling what you're saying. It either was incidental or it was deeply entrenched. Here I read, it's
What do you guys think of Norman Finkelstein's arguments?
deeply entrenched. Two very resonant words, inevitable and inbuilt.
Deeply entrenched, I never wrote.
Well, I'm not sure.
It's something you just invented.
Okay.
But
Inevitable and inbuilt.
The idea,
Okay,
let me concede,
fine,
let me concede
fine.
something.
No.
The idea of transfer was there. Israel Zangwill, a British Zionist, talked about it early on in the century. Even Herzl, in some way, talked about transferring population.
According to your 25 pages, everybody talked.
Well, we keep bringing up this line, the 25 page and the 4 pages.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, we're lucky to have Benny in front of us right now. We don't need to go to the quotes. Like, we can legitimately ask, how central is expulsion to Zionism in its early version of Zionism, in whatever Zionism is today, and how much power, influence does Zionism and ideology have in Israel, and the influence, the philosophy, the ideology of Zionism have on Israel today?
The Zionist movement up to 1948, Zionist ideology was central to the whole Zionist experience, the whole enterprise up to 1948. And I think Zionist ideology was also important in the first decades of Israel's existence. Slowly, the hold of Zionism, like if you like Bolshevism, held the Soviet Union, gradually faded. And a lot of Israelis today think in terms of individual success and then the capitalism and all sorts of things which have nothing to do with Zionism. But Zionism was very important. But what I'm saying is that the idea of transfer wasn't the core of Zionism. The idea of Zionism was to save the Jews, vastly persecuted in Eastern Europe and incidentally in the Arab world, the Muslim world, for centuries, and eventually ending up with the Holocaust. The idea of Zionism was to save the Jewish people by establishing a state or re-establishing a Jewish state on the ancient Jewish homeland, which is something the Arabs today even deny, that there were Jews in Palestine or the land of Israel 2,000 years ago. Arafat famously said, what temple was there on Temple Mount? Maybe it was in Nablus, which of course is nonsense. But they had a strong connection for thousands of years to the land to which they wanted to return, and returned there. They found that on the land lived hundreds of thousands of Arabs, and the question was how to accommodate the vision of a Jewish state in Palestine alongside the existence of these Arab masses living on, who were indigenous, in fact, to the land by that stage.
I agree with Benny Morrison that the Arab population was indigenous at this stage, of course.
And the idea of partition,
just like
because they couldn't live together, because the Arabs didn't want to live together with the Jews, and I think the Jews also didn't want to live together in one state with Arabs in general. The idea of partition was the thing which the Zionists accepted. Okay, we can only get a small part of Palestine. The Arabs will get in 37 most of Palestine. In 1947, the ratios were changed, but we can live side by side with each other in a partitioned Palestine, and this was the essence of it. The idea of transfer was there, but it was never adopted as policy. But in 1947-48, the Arabs attacked, trying to destroy essentially the Zionist enterprise and the emergent Jewish state. And the reaction was transfer in some way, not as policy, but this is what happened on the battlefield. And this is also—
That's good news by Ruben. The defense minister of Indonesia has said there's no formal requests for the Russian military base. That's interesting. That's very interesting.
So what Ben-Gurion at some point began to want as well.
Right. Well, one of the first books on this issue I read when I was still in high school, because my late father had it, was the Diaries of Theodor Herzl. And I think, Theodor Herzl, of course, was the founder of the contemporary Zionist movement. And I think if you read that, it's very clear. For Herzl, the model upon which the Zionist movement would proceed, his model was Cecil Rhodes. I think, Rhodes, from what I recall, correct me if I'm wrong, has quite a prominent place in Herzl's diaries. I think Herzl was also corresponding with him and seeking his support. Cecil Rhodes, of course, was the British colonialist after whom the former white minority regime in Rhodesia was named. And Herzl also says explicitly in his diaries that it is essential to remove the existing population from Palestine.
Can I respond to this?
In a moment, please. He says we shall have to spirit the penniless population across the borders and procure employment for them elsewhere. And Israel Zangwill, who you mentioned, a land without a people for a people without a land. They knew damn well it wasn't a land without a people. I'll continue, but please go ahead.
Just to this, there is one small diary entry in Herzl's vast—
it's 5 volumes.
Yeah, 5 volumes. There's one paragraph which actually mentions the idea of transfer. There are people who think that Herzl was actually pointing to South America when he was talking about that. The Jews were going to move to Argentina, and then they would try and buy out out or buy off or spirit the penniless natives to make way for Jewish settlement. Maybe he wasn't even talking about the Arabs in that particular passage. That's the argument of some people. Maybe he was, but the point is, it has only a 1/100th of a 1% of the diary which is devoted to the subject. It's not a central idea in Herzl's thinking. What Herzl wanted, and this is what's important, not Rhodes. I don't think he was the Herzl wanted to create a liberal, democratic, Western state in Palestine for the Jews. That was the idea. Not some imperial enterprise serving some imperial master, which is what Rhodes was about, but to have a Jewish state which was modeled on the Western democracies in Palestine. And this, incidentally, was more or less what Weizmann and Ben Gurion wanted. Ben Gurion was more of a socialist. Weizmann was more of a liberal Westerner, but they wanted to establish a social democratic or liberal state in Palestine, and they both envisioned through most of the years of their activity that there would be an Arab minority in that Jewish state. It's true that Ben Gurion strived to have as small as possible an Arab minority in the Jewish state, because he knew that if you want a Jewish majority state, that would be necessary, but it's not something which they were willing to translate into actual policy.
Just a quick pause to mention that for people who are not familiar, Theodor Herzl we're talking about over a century ago, and everything we've been talking about has been mostly 1948 and before.
Yes, just one clarification on Herzl's diaries. I mean, the other thing that I recall from those diaries is he was very preoccupied with, in fact, getting great power patronage, seeing Palestine, the Jewish state in Palestine, I think his words, an outpost of civilization against barbarism.
Yes.
In other words, very much seeing his project as a proxy for Western imperialism in the Middle East.
Right, not proxy. He wanted to establish a Jewish state which would be independent. To get that, he hoped that he would be able to garner support from major imperial powers,
including the Ottoman Sultan, who he tried to cultivate. I just want to respond to a point you made earlier, which was that people expressed their rejection of the partition resolution on the grounds that it gave the majority of Palestine to the Jewish community, which formed only a third. Whereas, in fact, if I understood you correctly, you're saying the Palestinians and the Arabs would have rejected any partition resolution.
Yeah,
I think
a couple things. That one, they would have rejected any. Two, a lot of that land given was in the Negev. It was pretty terrible land at the time. And three, the land that would have been partitioned to Jews, I think would have been, I think I saw it was like 500,000 Arabs. It would have been 500,000 Jews, 400,000 Arabs, and I think like 80,000 Bedouin would have been there. So the state would have been.
I think you raise a valid point. Because I think the Palestinians did reject the partition of their homeland in principle. And I think the fact that the United Nations General Assembly then awarded the majority of their homeland to the Zionist movement only added insult to injury. I mean, one doesn't have to sympathize with the Palestinians to recognize that they have now been a stateless people for 75 years. Can you name any country, yours, for example, or yours, that would be prepared to give 55%, 25%, 10% of your country to the Palestinians? Of course not. And so the issue was not the existence of Jews in Palestine. They had been there for centuries. And of course they had ties to Palestine, and particularly to Jerusalem and other places, going back centuries, if not millennia. But the idea of establishing an exclusively Jewish state at the expense of those who are already living there, I think it was right to reject that. And I don't think we can look back now, 75 years later, and say, well, you should have accepted losing 55% of your homeland because you ended up losing 78% of it, and the remaining 22% was occupied in 1967. That's not how things work.
Yeah.
And I can imagine an American rejecting giving 10% of the United States to the Palestinians, and if that rejection leads to war and you lose half your country, I doubt that 50 years from now you're going to say, well, maybe I should have accepted that.
Sure. So I like this answer more than what I usually feel like I'm hearing when it comes to the Palestinian rejection of the 47 partition plan. Because sometimes I feel like a weird switch happens to where the Arabs in the area are actually presented as entirely pragmatic people who are simply doing a calculation and saying like, well, we're losing 55% of our land, Jews are only maybe 1/3 of the people here, and we've got 45, and the math doesn't work basically. But it wasn't a math problem. I think, like you said,
it was a matter of principle.
It was an ideology problem.
No, it was a matter of principle.
Yeah, ideologically driven. That they, as a people, have a right to or are entitled to this land that they've never actually had an independent state on, that they've never had even a guarantee of an independent state on, that they've never actually ruled a government on.
That last point is actually not correct, because for all its injustice, the mandate system recognized Palestine as a Class A mandate, which provisionally recognized
The 55% majority given to the Jews was predominantly uninhabitable desert, which Israel has since greened. That's from P.S. Morgan. Interesting.
the independence
during the partition plan
of that territory.
Of what would emerge from that territory, but not of the Palestinian.
It was provisionally recognized.
But not, but the territory itself was, but not of the Palestinian people to have a right or a guarantee to a government that
It
would
was a
emerge
British mandate of Palestine, not the British mandate of Israel.
The word exclusive, which you keep using, is nonsense. The state which Ben Gurion envisioned would be a Jewish majority state, as they accepted the 1947 partition resolution, as Stephen said. That included 400,000 plus Arabs.
I think I'm probably going to have to leave in about 5 minutes, guys. If you guys have any comments, please put them into the chat. I probably have to leave in about 5 minutes, unfortunately. It'll just be a shorter one today, but I'm going to be streaming every single day for the next 100 days. So this is episode 2 of the Drew Pavlis Show. We're going to go to 100 episodes.
in a
yeah,
state
if
which
you
would have
guys have any
500,000
comments, please
Jews.
put them
So
in
the idea of
chat. I've got about
exclusivity
5
wasn't
minutes
anywhere
left,
in
probably.
the air at all among the Zionist leaders.
I think it
In
was
47, 48, they wanted a Jewish majority state, but were willing to accept a state which had 40% Arabs. That's one point. The second thing is the Palestinians may have regarded the land of Palestine as their homeland, but so did the Jews. It was the homeland of the Jews as well. The problem was the Arabs were unable and remain to this day unable to recognize that for the Jews, that is their homeland as well. And the problem then is, how do you share this homeland either with one binational state or separate this partition into two states? The problem is that the Arabs have always rejected both of these ideas. The homeland belongs to the Jews, as Jews feel, as much as it does, if not more, than for the Arabs.
Jews.
I would say for the Jews. It's the Jewish people's
I would also,
homeland.
real quick, I just want for both of you guys, because I haven't heard these questions answered. I really want these questions to be, I'm just so curious how to make sense of them. It was correctly brought up that I believe that Ben Gurion had, I think Shlomo Ben-Ami describes it as an obsession.
I just want to say here, I remember when this interview first came out a year ago, and I remember there were so many people like mocking Destiny, saying he was a disaster in the interview. He's been fine in the interview. This whole narrative that Destiny got mocked in the interview, that was really just tanky bullshit.
Or support from Western states, Great Britain, and then a couple decades later,
That explains the Suez War.
Yeah.
Bro, why do you keep smiling like that every time you hear Destiny? You look like you just saw your crush, LMAO. No. My GF walked in off stream. That's private. That's private. It's nothing to do with Destiny.
Exactly.
I do like Destiny. I like Destiny, but I don't have a crush on Destiny. I have a crush on my GF.
Major motivators, the idea to work with Britain and France on a military operation.
Imperial stooge.
But then the question again, I go back to, if that is true, if Ben
That's a
Gurion,
great
if the
comment.
early Israel saw themselves as a Western fashion nation, how could they possibly imagine that they would have engaged in the transfer of some 400,000 Arabs?
I like that you guys noticed that.
Would that not have completely and totally destroyed their legitimacy in the eyes of the entire Western world? Would not have been. How not?
Well, first of all,
Guys,
I
if you're
think
watching on YouTube, please remember to
Zionist leadership's
comment.
acceptance of the partition resolution, and I think you may have written about this, that they accepted it because it provided international endorsement of.
It's very funny because the commentators think that I was smiling because I saw my crush Destiny, but it was actually my GF.
The legitimacy of the principle of Jewish statehood, and they didn't accept the borders.
That's funny.
And in fact, later expanded the borders. Second of all,
the borders were expanded.
Hey Ryan, thanks for joining, man. Sorry that I'm leaving very shortly.
You can say that some of the Zionists, deep in their hearts, had the idea that maybe at some point they would be able to get more.
Including their most senior leaders who said so, and I think you've quoted them saying so.
They grudgingly accepted what the United Nations, the world community, had said, this is what you're going to get.
And second of all, I mean, removing darker people, it's intrinsic. It's intrinsic to Western history. So the idea that Americans or Brits or the French would have an issue with, I mean, the French had been doing it in Algeria for decades. The Americans have been doing it in North America for centuries. So how would Israel forcibly displacing Palestinians somehow besmirch Israel in the eyes of the West?
In the 1944 resolution of the Labour
By the way,
Party,
guys,
at the time,
I'm leaving in about 2 minutes, but I just want to say tomorrow, 5 p.m. Arizona time, and that's going to be 10 a.m. Australia time, I'm going to be debating Israel-Palestine with History Speaks, who has about 30,000 subscribers on YouTube. So big one tomorrow. This is why I've been doing some of my homework on Israel-Palestine today. Ryan Howe says, no problem, live in different time zones, and I've been busy. Thank you, guys. So yeah, tomorrow, 5 p.m. What's the time again? Yeah, tomorrow, 5 p.m., Monday, 14 April, 5 p.m. Phoenix time, 10 a.m. Tuesday, Brisbane time. I'm going to be debating History Speaks on Israel-Palestine.
As a member of the Labour Party, it endorsed transfer of Arabs out of
Hello,
Palestine.
thank you for joining
As
us, V.
pointed out, that was a
Any other
deeply
fellow
entrenched idea in Western thinking, but there was nothing.
That's cool. We've actually got some Canadians in the chat. That's brilliant. I think Ryan's from Canadian. I think Ryan's from Canada, Yuki. That's cool. It's funny
doesn't in any way contradict or violate or breach any moral values to displace the Palestinian population. Now, I do believe there's a legitimate question.
Yeah, absolutely, Viet. So I've got to end the stream a little bit early today, which is a shame. I think we had like 20 live viewers on YouTube at one point. I think we almost got to 100 live viewers on Twitter at one point. In total, 2,600 on Twitter. Mainly going to be trying to build up my YouTube, but I'm going to be streaming every single day for 100 days, and hopefully by the day on 100, we'll have a much better audience. But I appreciate everybody who's been here from the ground zero. And it's actually a shame that I'm leaving early today. So tomorrow, 10 a.m. Brisbane time, 5 p.m. That'll be 5 p.m. Phoenix time. I'll be debating History Speaks, 30,000 subscribers on YouTube. We'll be debating live on Israel-Palestine on October 7 and the ongoing war. So that'll be tomorrow. That'll be for episode 3 of the Drew Pavlo Show. And we're going to be streaming every single day for 100 days. So I appreciate everybody who's been watching. I think we've got 13 people on YouTube still. Please, guys, remember to subscribe and like a comment. I unfortunately have to leave very soon. I apologize for that, but thank you guys for watching today. And yeah, remember, tomorrow, 5 p.m. Arizona time, 10 a.m. Brisbane time, I'm going to be doing a really big, great debate with History Speaks on the subject of Israel-Palestine. And I'm excited for that one. He's very, very pro-Palestine. We've got very different views on this stuff. It'll be really interesting. So remember that 5 p.m. tomorrow, Arizona time, 10 a.m. Brisbane time, AEST. And I'll see you guys tomorrow. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. I apologize that I have to leave early. Got to take my dog to get a haircut. But thank you so much, guys. This was stream 2. We're going to be streaming every day for 100 days. So remember to please subscribe. I really appreciate it. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. Good night, Ryan Howe. Thank you, Viet Tran. Thank you, Miss V. Thank you, Yuki Kanuk. I appreciate everyone who's been watching. I really appreciate Phil Morgan too. Thank you, guys. I'll see you tomorrow, hopefully. Thank you, guys. God bless you all. See you guys.